From the grinding of grain at dawn to the baking of bread in clay ovens, bread shaped the entire rhythm of daily life in a Galilean village of the 1st century. Before the sun rose above the hills, the deep, steady sound of grinding stones already echoed through inner courtyards. It was long, repetitive, physically exhausting work, carried out mostly by women, who began their day while the rest of the village still slept. Each turn of the millstone demanded time, strength, and endurance. The process began with wheat stored in large clay jars, carefully sealed to protect it from moisture and animals. The grain was poured onto hand mills made of stone, consisting of a fixed base and a heavy upper stone that had to be rotated continuously. These tools were simple but demanding, requiring hours of daily labor. The flour produced was coarse and uneven, often containing bits of husk and fine grit that, over time, wore down the teeth of those who ate it. Water, drawn from the communal well, was added slowly, and the dough was kneaded by hand until it reached a dense, sticky consistency. There was no yeast as a separate product. To make the bread rise, a small piece of dough from the previous day was carefully preserved and mixed into the new batch. Losing this fermented starter meant beginning again, resulting in flatter, harder bread. Preparation relied on experience rather than written recipes or precise measurements. Hands knew when the dough was ready. Time was measured by daylight and fatigue, not by clocks. In villages such as Nazareth, ovens were essential structures for survival. Many were communal, built of hardened clay and reinforced with stones over years of constant use. Others stood in family courtyards and were shared by several households. These ovens were usually cylindrical or slightly conical, with a front opening where fuel was fed. Dry branches, thorns, and plant remains were burned to heat the interior. Once the proper temperature was reached, the embers were pushed aside, and the flattened loaves were pressed directly onto the inner walls of the oven. Baking was quick but required close attention. A moment of distraction could burn the bread or leave it undercooked. The smell of baking bread drifted through narrow streets, mixing with smoke and dust. It signaled nourishment, but it also reminded everyone how fragile daily survival was. Not every household had enough bread each day. During times of scarcity, portions were reduced, and loaves were made smaller and thinner. Bread stood at the center of domestic economy. Wheat was a valuable resource, and its price changed with the harvest, rainfall, and the taxes imposed by authorities. In the year one, producing bread required constant calculation. A portion of the grain had to be set aside for tribute. Another portion was exchanged for oil, salt, or tools. What remained was carefully reserved for daily consumption. There was no room for waste. A mistake in grinding, a failed fermentation, or an improperly heated oven could mean hunger. Baking bread was not a stable profession. It was a continual struggle to endure. A prolonged drought, a swarm of locusts, or a sudden increase in taxation could push a family to the edge. Bakers depended on weather, soil, and distant political decisions they could not control. Yet abandoning this work was impossible. Without bread, the community could not survive. Beyond its material value, bread carried deep cultural and religious meaning in Jewish life. Before it was broken, a blessing was spoken. Bread was shared within the family and offered to the needy. It was not merely food, it was a sign of divine provision. To eat bread was to participate in a sacred continuity that joined human labor with trust in God. Thus, each day, from the first grinding of grain to the final loaf pulled from the oven, bread sustained the community. In every piece were fatigue, discipline, and faith. Feeding others was not only an economic task. It was an act of daily resistance and a quiet expression of hope, repeated again and again as the sun rose over the hills of Galilee.